The following was provided courtesy of Falls Area Community Television and The Commons, and originally aired on the program Conversations Vermont, produced and hosted by Allison Teague. This episode is entitled Homelessness, Myths, Gaps, and Successes, an interview with Pat Burke from SEVCA, Josh Davis from Morningside Shelter, and Lisa Pitcher from Our Place Drop-In Center.
So, Josh, what are you seeing at Morningside this winter? Are you seeing an increase of people, and what are the demographics?
And so, Morningside, just so we're clear on, our agencies are interacting with the system in different ways. And Morningside Shelter is a 30-bed shelter in Brattleboro that serves individual, male, female, and also families with children. We have 30 beds, but the arrangement of the rooms, at any given time, we have about 25 people that are there. Our capacity is only so much. If there's 100 people that need to come into the shelter, we can only still get in about 25 people at a time.
Where do they go if they can't get in there?
In Brattleboro, they go to the emergency overflow shelter that's at the First Baptist Church. In Bellows Falls, there's the Greater Falls Warming Shelter that's right across the river in Walpole. And both are being heavily utilized this winter. And so it's a testament to the fact of how many people need housing. And so we have people that call to try to get into the shelter. Over the last 3 months, we've had about 150 people, individual people that have called trying to get into the shelter. We're only able to get about 15% of those callers into a bed. And so there's another huge amount of folks that are in need of housing supports.
What are they doing?
Some of
if
those
they
folks
can't?
go to the overflow shelter or to the warming shelter here in Bellows Falls. Others will sleep on couches, stay at friends' houses, which then as we talk about these ripples, it puts pressure on those folks, and the potential for eviction increases because guests can only stay in a lot of low income or subsidized units for 2 weeks.
Right.
And so once you go past 2 weeks, then you're putting that housing into jeopardy. People are sleeping in their cars. So a lot of movement, bouncing from one family to another, bringing small children in tow. And so we talk about the ripple effects of homelessness, the trauma. I mean, a lot of the trauma experiences that we see, or I should say some of them, are not direct trauma from being in an abusive relationship, but just the trauma of interacting with the system and bouncing around from house to house, not having the stability, not being able to foster a loving and supportive attachment because you're always moving around. It's not that parents aren't trying. We see parents that have amazing survival skills and kids that are so resilient, but yet we're exposing them to situations it's doing large damage that we're going to have to reap the repercussions of that 10, 15 years down the line.
What do you think is causing this kind of continued increase in homelessness? Anybody? Josh?
The first thing that I would point to is, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, productivity in this country in terms of gross national product has steadily climbed. We're in a great environment for an economy. Businesses are doing really well. CEOs are making all-time highs right now. Over that same period, we have real wages that are stagnating. They haven't gone up really at all. They haven't gone up to keep up with the productivity, but they also haven't gone up to keep up with the cost of living. And so you do that, you multiply that out 30, 40 years, it's where we are today, where we're celebrating the governor and the state increasing the minimum wage to $9.15. But we're also looking at what is the real housing wage or the livable wage, and that gap is going to be upwards of $17, $19 an hour. And as long as we have this great disparity between what wages are and what it costs to live in a place, we're going to have issues that we face with homelessness. And, people are falling out of homes because they get behind for whatever reason. And I think the community at large wants to point the finger and say that it's bad choices, but it negates the fact of the system that they're operating in that doesn't allow for any sort of slip up or mistake whatsoever. So if you do things exactly right, you may be able to get by. But if you have a health emergency, if your car breaks down, if you call in sick, you're going to get fired, you get behind in rent. Very much a proponent that the way that we think about poor people and the way that we think about poverty is that it's the person's fault. And so if it's the person's fault, then that's going to inform all the program. It's going to inform the way that we work with people, as opposed to saying, let's take a step back and see how the system is constructed and produces this, and will continue to produce this, and these numbers will get larger. So, it's hard to say that it's a person's fault for being lazy. So do we have chronic laziness in this country? Is it increasing? Are people catching laziness? And so that's why there's more impoverished? And that's what some people, if you follow the logic of thought out, that's where it would take you, as opposed to saying the system, there's mass inequity in this system that continues to grow. And so it's going to produce homelessness, poverty, people having to use food shelves, more and more people having to use food shelves.
Right. Right. And look at how we set up our system and our guidelines. Do you have electric disconnect? Oh, not just you're behind in your electric, let me help you. You need to have a disconnect. So we put people already down on the ground to be able to receive the help. Do you have an eviction notice? Oh, you don't? Like if someone came to me and said, in a couple of weeks, I know I'm going to have problems paying my rent, the way that the money is set up, the help is set up, it's like, well, come back when you're going to have a disconnect, when your landlord has actually given you a disconnect notice. Then I can pull down some of these funds and be able to say, oh, now you're homeless, and I can use this money. And I mean, that doesn't teach people to that doesn't reward them for saying, hey, I'm going to have a problem next month. That rewards them for saying, I'm going to wait, and I'm not even going to open my electric bill until it's red, and then I know I can go get help. So we set the system up for help in that way of putting people down.
Yeah. So they have to wait till they get to the crisis, and then they have to deal with the stress of that crisis, and then they'll go and they'll get the help. But just that stress itself of keep getting to that point.
And so the most expensive thing that we could do is put somebody in a motel. The next expensive thing is to put them into a shelter. Then you have an apartment. Then you have paying for whatever back rent or situation that they might happen to be in to keep them in housing. So it's the cheaper thing to do. It's the most humane thing to do, because you're not going to have to enter the system if you can remain in housing. And yet, because our approach is set up in a crisis approach, this continues to go on, and it's a big debate right now as we're starting the legislative session today.
Yes.
Today we're starting, and so we're going to have to cut money out of the budget. That's what all the legislators are talking about, is where are these cuts going to come from. And every time that there's cuts, human services is on the chopping block. And programs like this are seen as a waste of funds, but necessary. And so legislators feel like their hands are tied. And we can't have conversations about moving from our approach to a new approach with investment, because you have to have investment dollars to change the approach of the way that the system is set up. And so we're fighting to keep what little money we have to keep these crisis approaches going, knowing that we know it works. It's no secret how you can get people housed. You get them an apartment, you help pay for some of their rent, you bring some wraparound services when needed, and you get them hooked up with jobs and childcare and support and transportation, and the list goes on and on. It's a long process, but we know it works. We just need the funding and the support to do that. Yeah, that's great. So when we're looking at all of these things, as a service provider, you're subjected to the whims of the state or other funders. And I think a few of us got together, Pat being the impetus for this, to say, okay, if we had a little bit of money, what would we do? What would we create? And so there were representatives from 5 Brattleboro agencies, where we had to take a Brattleboro focus, but we definitely are open to helping people throughout the county. We have representatives from HCRS, Youth Services, Women's Freedom Center, Winston Prouty, SEVCA, and Morningside Shelter. And we were able to get a little bit of money from Brattleboro Area Affordable Housing to support the work, which was a very generous contribution on their part. To say, okay, for people that don't fit into any of these sharply defined categories for assistance, or have something that we see as preventative, it might not be a direct housing need, but something that is going to have an impact on their housing. we can bring them to this group, put it before this group and say, okay, well, how about we help them in a creative way? We pull some resources together, and maybe we subsidize part of their rent for a few months. Maybe we help take care of a car payment or a car repair so that they're able to get to work, they don't lose their job, they're able to maintain their housing. And it's started this summer, and it's been a really interesting exercise, both to be able to work with people in that way with a little bit more freedom and flexibility, but also to interact with other service agencies in a collaborative and I would say rigorous. We really challenge one another.
Yes.
You know, as you're talking, I'm sitting there thinking, we're investing in people, and so what I've seen a lot of in the assist that we have provided is that it's 2, 3, 5 months out. And so we're really investing in the person as opposed to paying for a back rent or taking care of something that's happened in the past. This is really looking forward, which also changes the dynamic between the agency and the individual that we're working with, because in a manner of speaking, it's, you know, we believe in what's going on with you.
Josh? Yeah. So.
I think the only thing that I would add is that we're up here representing agencies, and I think it's easy to think about homelessness and poverty as an agency or a government issue, but it's really a community issue. And viewing it in such a way, we've talked a little bit about the system today. I would encourage folks to think about how the system supports this or keeps reproducing these things that we're seeing today, as opposed to pointing the finger at lazy people and deconstruct that myth a little bit.
To see the full episode, go to fact8.com and click on Conversations Vermont.